Hello and welcome to today's session 3 of AI in management. And so we'll get started in about a couple of minutes. So sit tight and we'll go ahead and give everybody an opportunity to jump on. All right, so we're right at the top of the hour. So I'll go ahead and get us going here for our quick, short, and sweet webinar session. So today we're going to focus in on performance, and we've been covering mindset shift, how to understand AI as a manager, and what it looks like to shift into mode to remain competitive. Today, we're really going to dive into that performance piece. And part of the reason why I think it's so important is because of what I'm seeing out there. So I'll share a little bit about myself, my experience, as I usually do, and we'll get right into the beef of it all. So I'm Dr. Myra Austin. I am the CEO and founder of a company called Management Cues. So if you haven't met me before, I'll share just a little bit about who we are. So we're a management and leadership training company that's scientifically proven to work. We ground a lot of what we do in neuroscience and things that we learned in our research project around how we train and whether people are actually learning or not and retaining what they're learning. We measure performance and learning in the training experience, which makes us unique. So we take a look at how you're actually learning as you're training to ensure that our clients get a return on investment. And so performance is definitely something that we're all too familiar with. So every single week, we've been breaking things down the same way. We do an overview, we break down the topic, we go through some takeaways, and we share some resources that you could definitely tap into for some of these areas. So let's go ahead and break it down. So when it comes to performance, it's going to shift because technology is moving us in a different direction. So some of the things that managers should really take into consideration when it comes to performance in the workplace specifically is that AI is actively shaping how performance is measured, how we're going to look at it, how we're going to challenge it, how we're going to manage it, right? And of course, I always mention there's a debate as to whether management rules will exist or not in the future. My personal opinion is that it's definitely going to change and it may evolve into something else, but there are some key components that are still going to need to be very essential to overall company performance. So the question is no longer should we use AI? We're kind of that boat has already left, right? We're already in mode. The real question is, are managers equipped right now to use it responsibly and effectively? And I've had a lot of dialogue with a lot of people on both sides of the debate. But one thing that I like to share with them is that there is a light side, a great side to AI, and then there's a dark side and an unknown gray that I see and I run into quite often when I'm challenging areas of AI in terms of how we're using it and how well we understand its design, right? And its purpose. So one thing that's really important for us to acknowledge in business environments in the workplace, and it's relevant right now, right? It may not be relevant in the future, but it's relevant right this minute. Um, this research has shown us that long-term ROI around AI is really tied to doing it right, to following a sync as we're implementing, as we're integrating, as we're educating, as we're scaling our businesses, right? So the reality is that you get a great return on investment when you have complementary investments taking place in the people, where you understand processes clearly and are integrating things successfully. And when you're understanding the implications within management systems, that's when it actually succeeds. There are several cases of AI failing in terms of performance. Across industries because these things aren't being vetted or aligned, right? So the reality that managers are facing right now is that they're already kind of in the middle of things or just getting kind of thrown in there, and they're navigating AI assisted hiring decisions. That's happening largely. There's algorithm driven performance insights, right? Which gives you that kind of feeling of, oh, here's what I should be doing, or here's what I should make a decision around. And there's productivity that's being tracked more so than ever before, which can create burnout, can create stress around things that maybe weren't stressful before. And there are automated recommendations, right? Which creates that automation bias that we talked about, where we start to be a little codependent on what AI is going to say and just default immediately to thinking that it's always correct. And so that's part of the challenge around performance right now, because the risk is that when AI enters performance management and there's no discipline around it, there's no framework, there's no understanding of how the software is designed or what it's intentionally coded for or who coded it, right? To anticipate any bias, those kinds of things, then certain things happen kind of naturally because of it. And what happens is judgment gets replaced with automation, right? And it's very comfortable and it's very easy to do because outputs from AI just sound really confident. They sound right. And that does something for us from a neuroscience perspective. Bias becomes harder to detect, not easier. So we have to know what it does in terms of limitations. And I think we haven't gotten very comfortable with that as just as a people, and especially in the workforce. I've done challenges and workshops and tests with students, professional students at the undergrad level and graduate level, and even with managers that I train through my company. And it's difficult for them to actually know how to detect bias, which means that if AI is biased, they aren't able to actually call it out, pull it out, and diagnose it. And so that's just one example of one area, one topic, one flaw that is gonna become a problem, right? It's gonna be, from a business perspective, it can create a litigious environment. It could create risk. It could also undermine performance overall. So employees feel monitored, not supported. And so that's something that comes with kind of this 24-hour AI type of energy, because AI doesn't have the limits that humans do, right? So you can have something surveilling you 24 hours. It's not going to get tired, but you are definitely going to feel the impact. And the psychological safety declines, right? If you're being monitored, if you're being surveilled, you're not going to feel safe, right? Or free, or these other concepts that we have as people that really speak and aid our own performance and overall quality of our own output. So performance, it becomes distorted, not improved, when we don't watch these lines, or when we don't know how to call out the flaws, or when we don't really understand how it's been designed, right, in terms of technology. So there's a psychological and safety risk there, right? So when AI is misused, which it has been, there's already legislation being written, there's already legal cases, harm has already been done. And we just need to be aware so that we navigate, so that we anticipate how to manage against these things in real time, right? So employees hesitate to speak up because, again, there's all these feelings around it. Trust in the evaluation process declines because there's no real intervention. There's no exception to the rule. There's no recollection of what's happening in the live environment or the interactions or transactions taking place, because AI does not do well with things like context and judgment, right? It basically works off of a sequence of patterns in most cases and learns off of that, right? So we have to understand that there's limitations to that. So effort shifts from performance to perception management, right? And so you're constantly walking on eggshells, trying to be careful versus performing. And so these are things that happen psychologically. So managers really have to get into the mode of asking, are we using technology, including AI, to create clarity, or are we creating fear, right? Like how are we approaching these areas that no doubt exist, as we're utilizing and implementing and getting really excited about what we don't do anymore, and what costs it saves us, right? Which is a big motivator, especially from a company or business perspective. I understand that. But data versus discernment. So data tells you what is happening, right? You have the kind of numbers, the figures, the outcomes in front of you, in a numerical way, in a tangible way. Discernment tells you what it actually means and what story it's telling and what to do next, right? And that includes context, judgment, an ethical viewpoint, morality, and understanding of what you observed in the live environment. Those types of things, technology and AI is not there yet, right? So AI can inform your decisions, absolutely, and it could be a very powerful collaboration and partnership, but it cannot replace managerial responsibility. And I think that that's critical because as managers, you will be held liable for the decisions that are made. And so things like automation bias or cognitive decline or regression or codependency developed through the tools that we used, that's not necessarily what's going to save you from personal liability or a negligence claim or these types of things. And so we have to draw that line so that we're able to make a distinction and provide an overall legitimate outcome, qualified outcome. So management discipline is definitely required. In an AI driven workplace, effective managers have to have a protocol that they rely on. And so as leaders, if we're not training our managers, if we're not stepping into this in a transparent way, they just won't have it and will default to this kind of autonomous way of just following what the technology says or recommends. And so you have to question the outputs, not just accept them, right? And you have to know that it's going to sound confident, it's going to sound right. You have to know how to test it. And you have to interpret patterns with context. So things like AI will follow a sequence patterns, but it will not have context, right? And so you have to know that that doesn't exist and that you have to use what it gives you and then adapt. You have to protect fairness and psychological safety. So you have to gauge your audience, and managers are going to have to get better at that because now there are different triggers, there are different stressors that this technology is introducing to humanity overall, right? And I'm talking about specifically in the workplace. There's a larger conversation around the technology, but you want to make final decisions and accountability and really know that you're owning it, right? And so as a manager, as a leader, you have to take ownership of that. And this is where management becomes the differentiator. So this is part of the reason why I say the management role isn't quite done yet, and neither is the leadership role when it comes to this technology, because there has to be an intervention that takes place because of the liability for one, and two, as long as there is humanity involved, there's going to be a need for a point of escalation, right? And so if we come to the point where that point of escalation is no longer needed or there, then I think we have a larger fish to fry and bigger concerns at that point, as to what humanity's role is within it, right? So here's a case study, and I think it's important for us to see who's doing it well and who's kind of missed the ball. But today we're going to focus on IBM. So they introduced AI enhanced performance management, and they left us with some great lessons. And here's the source. You could click and read the research and article around it when you get the deck, if you registered for attendance. So here is the challenge that they faced. So they faced familiar growing problems or challenges in the workforce that most employers are faced with. Traditional performance reviews were too slow and backward looking. And to be quite honest, even when it comes to performance reviews, I feel like most managers aren't trained on executing the right way, and understand, how to use it as a positive tool versus a discipline tool. Managers lacked real-time visibility into performance, so they didn't necessarily know how to gauge it. They didn't see the gaps, they didn't see the patterns maybe. And employees felt disconnected from the evaluation criteria, right? It was generic, or it didn't necessarily identify their specific opportunities, which I see happen quite often as well over the span of my career. Development conversations were inconsistent across teams. And again, when we're building culture, we should train our managers and leaders to execute things like performance reviews in a cohesive, standardized way that speaks and aligns to who we say we are. And that is also something that is challenging for companies. So at the same time, capabilities started to roll out. And everybody kind of started to get excited and dive into the movement and adapting and adopting, right? Both adapting and adopting AI. So the risk wasn't adopting AI, it was adopting it without the management discipline, right? And so their approach to understanding that and kind of acknowledging that that piece was real and it was there, they introduced an AI-enabled performance management system, where they were getting continuous feedback instead of the annual reviews. They were using AI to identify skills gaps and development opportunities, so very targeted and aligned with that kind of development objective. They offered personalized learning recommendations, which again made it so that it's a little bit more personalized and human centered. And they started to support managers with data, but they weren't replacing them, they were making them more effective. So the line between AI's contribution and the manager's contribution was extremely clear. And so the key tools included AI driven insights, and employee skills and progression tool, an internal talent marketplace matching skills to opportunities, so that they were, aligning their culture with these things that included the human, right? Didn't expel it, but include them. And they used predictive analytics to retain and to look at performance trends. So they were looking at retention as one of the things that they wanted to do. Again, largely human centered, which makes a difference. And you have a clear designation between AI and the human contribution. So here's what they did right. And I really do consider this to be part of best practices for managers and leaders out there, especially right now. AI supported, did not replace manager judgment, but they made it clear what judgment looked like for their workforce, and where they would start, right? Where AI would finish and where the manager would start. AI provided insights, but managers remained accountable for their decisions, right? So that ownership is key and helps us not get stuck with that automation bias, because we know that we are going to be held accountable and where that line needs to be drawn. This prevented that automation bias and ensured that context was applied, right? So now we're going to have to teach people how to introduce their context into these outputs. It shifted from a role-based to skills-based type of management. So another thing that I'm recommending for managers right now with this technology shift is to redefine their role, but know what it is, right? Not just think of it as it being redefined, but you have no idea what that redefinition looks like. Labor it, right? So IBM moved towards skills tracking over job title reliance, which is a upcoming trend, and I'm seeing that start to happen. Dynamic capability mapping. So important to do that, because now we need to have higher awareness of where our gaps are. That is our contribution and how it plays out in the live environment. Now we just have a way to diagnose it quicker, more effectively, but we have to know how to use it. Targeted development planning, right? So people are going to know what their future looks like with this type of introduction. So this aligned performance with actual capability, not assumed roles of expectations. So what this does is that instead of people trying to fight for a promotion for a leadership role that they're excited about, they're going to focus on developing the skills that are needed and are going to make them competitive within the environment. It's definitely a shift. It's a shift from the traditional way that we look at management, leadership, promotion, career evolution, all of that, right? So we have to step into this. So made performance continuous, right? So performance wasn't just a word, and it wasn't something that necessarily was superficial. Instead of annual reviews, they implemented these ongoing feedback loops. So you're constantly working on what improvement looks like. Real-time performance check-ins allows you to address bottlenecks in real time instead of wait until a review or a specific period, right? It's just more real-time information. There were frequent development conversations, which I can tell you that's where you want to invest resources, is in preparing managers to have the right type of conversations. And this improved accuracy and responsiveness because you are being actively engaged with a lot more information that's specific to the person in front of you. There was increased transparency. So employees had visibility into how they were being evaluated, what skills they needed to develop, where they stood in real time, and that strengthened the trust and the psychological safety because there was a plan, there was a purpose, and there was an area of opportunity, all very clearly mapped out. Connected AI to development, not surveillance. So again, the technology is amazing. I can't deny it. We use it. I look at it from all kinds of different angles because I want to make sure that I'm objective and that I am forward thinking, but I'm also not negligent. That's an important part of my own credibility. So AI was positioned as a growth tool, not a monitoring system. And this reduced the fear and increased engagement. So if you can as managers, if we are able to make the distinction and we are able to use it for a defined purpose and people can see it as a win-win situation, psychological safety increases, right? But we have to be the gateway and we have to understand it before we are able to do that. So the results. So this is what they reported as an outcome of this whole process of what they did with AI. It increased employee engagement. There was more internal mobility through skills matching. It improved alignment between performance and development. And there was stronger manager effectiveness in coaching conversations. And it makes sense because it wasn't generic anymore. It wasn't surface level. There was context, that was rooted in how the AI or the technology supported the manager, but the manager still had to execute and use judgment and have the right degree of conversation and be able to have time to have these kind of frequent feedback loops, right? All of that is the shift, and that's where things are headed. So here's a best practice framework for managers to apply these shifts effectively. Diagnose before acting. So use AI as input, not conclusion. And it's really important to make that distinction. I see a lot of students using AI as conclusion and not necessarily as input, especially in their assignments. And I'm seeing managers do that too in their decision making. Always validate with context, right? Separate signal from noise. Not all data is meaningful. And so one thing that that I share in my workshops with my students and with our training sessions with our clients is the data that's training AI is coming from all sorts of places. It's not all vetted. It's not all good data. The sequencing and patterning is not all meaningful. It's just following a pattern, right? Because there's no context, there's no judgment, there's no ethics, and there's no lived lens, which that's what we contribute through experience. So focus on patterns that connect to performance outcomes. Just make sure you're connecting the dots at the end of the day, and protect psychological safety. Be transparent about how AI is used. Position it as a development tool, not as a surveillance or monitoring tool. That is such a mistake to position it in that way or to make it feel that way, because you could say that it's not. And then if you're using it in that way, it's going to be harmful and it's going to have repercussions. Anchor in skills, not titles. That's where things are moving. Evaluate and develop based on capability, not role assumptions, right? Progression, success, a better quality of life is all going to shift in terms of how we achieve it. Stay accountable. AI informs decisions. Managers, you still own them. And if anything goes wrong based on an output you received and you ran with, legally, you will still be held responsible for the decision that was made and executed on. So here's the bottom line. AI is not improving performance management. Disciplined managers using AI the right way, they are. Right. And so you have to be able to work that context in and really believe it to separate how convincing it is in terms of what it does. So organizations that succeed are going to be able to combine data with the discernment, and they're going to be able to train their teams to do this very well, like do the dance, right? They're going to prioritize human-centered leadership because it's going to be necessary. And they're going to train managers not just to deploy tools, but to understand where they come into play and where their contribution starts and where the contribution for the technology ends. So, an AI driven workplace, technology scales performance, but management will determine its quality and where organizations get it wrong. And there are several organizations who have gotten it wrong, are getting it wrong right now. And so we need to take lessons from that as well. Many organizations attempt similar systems, but they fail because they over rely on AI outputs without questioning them. They use AI for monitoring instead of development. They lack clear performance criteria before they introduce the tools, and they ignore the psychological safety impacts of introducing it and then the performance that comes from it. And they fail to train managers on how to interpret the tool and how it actually works and how it's intended to be used. So here are 10 real everyday AI powered performance management tools that are out there in the market. If you're already using these, I would say that you definitely want to apply some of the things we talked about today to use it the right way, get the better outcome, and you yourself become a subject matter expert in these areas. And that's going to be your management, leadership, competitive advantage. So here are our key takeaways for today. AI enhances visibility, but not understanding. Automation bias is a growing risk. I'm seeing it everywhere and I'm testing it in real time, and it's astounding the results that I get. Performance management is shifting to continuous performance where you're living performance, not just looking at it once a year, once a quarter, or when you're just disciplining somebody. It's becoming more fluid. Psychological safety is directly impacted by this, and it's already impacting tons of people in a lot of different ways. Managers are the differentiators, not the technology. And that's one of the reasons why I think their role is here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. So, Q&A, I'll leave it up and look at, I know we're streaming on YouTube, so I'll check out and see if there's any questions there. It looks like we're okay to move forward. So training and support resources. So for those of you that registered, you'll get a link to the recording. You'll get a copy of this webinar deck for you to keep and use. And then, of course, we have links on the deck for training programs we have available, our management planner, which is our main planner that we use with managers when we're training to kind of walk them through their thinking in everyday life. We've linked our neuroscience studies in case you're a research buff and are curious about what was tested in our programs and what the results were. And of course, if you'd like to schedule a consultation with me, please feel free to do so at any time. Happy to help. And we have, last but not least, our management membership programs, which are super affordable month to month, keep you on track on all things management for individual managers, teams of managers, executives, and as of late, nonprofits if you're interested. So with that said, thank you so much for joining. Next week, we're going to be touching on AI and what happens around culture, trust, and the employee perception. Very, very closely linked to the performance aspect that we just discussed. But there's a lot going on to us and within us when it comes to the integration of this technology and how it's being embedded in everything we do day in and day out, in personal setting and in professional setting. So there's quite a bit to learn there. So can't wait to see you. I'll catch you next week. Thank you again. Thank you for joining. Have a great, great week.